conversations to subscribe to notices on future events and see more resources for parents. I want to thank St. Vrain Valley School District, Boulder Valley School District, the NAACP Boulder County Branch, the Town of Erie, and especially Alicia Graves, who I will introduce in a moment, for your help and coordination to make this event happen. We are so excited to have Dr. Allen here with us for the second evening in a row. Tonight's topic is more important than ever. We need to talk to our children early and often about race, inclusion, and the value of diversity. For many of us, these conversations are not easy and we don't know where to start, but that's why we're here tonight, to help give you a starting point for talking with your children or other children about race. One amazing Erie resident, Alicia Graves, is behind this wonderful series we are kicking off tonight. Kicking off for the second time since this is elementary age students. Alicia brought this idea to the town, the school districts, and the NAACP Boulder County branch. Together, we brought her idea to a reality. Alicia was involved in the Being Better Neighbors March in Erie, the creation of Erie's Police Task Force, the creation of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, DE&I Advisory Board in Erie, and placing DE&I committees within Erie schools. She is a member of the Professional Standards Review Panel and also serves as the chair of the Education Committee of the NAACP Boulder County branch. She has lived in Erie for 5 years with her husband and 2 young boys. And with that, please welcome Alicia Graves.
Thank you, Mayor Carol. My name is Alicia Graves. I am an Erie mom and chair of the NAACP Boulder County branch. I'd like to start by sharing a story about why it is so important that our community comes together to begin this dialogue about race. My oldest child is in preschool. When we recently began in-person learning, I, like most of you, worried about the increased risk of COVID. But more than COVID, I was afraid of what kids would do and say to him as a child in a school with less than a dozen Black students. The reason I felt so afraid, especially this year, is that I was unable to enter the building with him. Last year, as I would walk into his classroom, I noticed white students stop and stare at him. Before COVID, I could walk with him and shield him from their stares. Now I am not able to leave the car. My protection ends in the parking lot. I have seen kids who don't want to sit next to him or share their toys, or who run away when he comes near. I watched a child refuse to touch him because they thought his skin was too dirty. A week ago, after going back to school, his preschool teacher told me that he'd made a new friend. She told me about the little girl who approached him, introduced herself, and asked to be best friends. Every morning, as his teacher pulls him from my car, I watch his little girl reach her arms out for my son. I rarely see them apart. She is constantly by his side. She is the shield I am not able to be. I later learned from her family that they had already introduced the concept of race to their children. It was not a coincidence that their daughter was comfortable befriending my son. He wasn't new to her because her family had already talked about race with their children. What I hope you gain from my story and these conversations is that our children are learning about race and forming biases at an early age. Who else besides you do you want to teach your children about race and racism? If we aren't talking with our children, we have no voice in shaping their understanding. Do you want your children to be a shield or the reason someone doesn't want to be their beautiful selves? Our speaker for this series is Dr. Rosemarie Allen. Dr. Allen earned her BA from California State University, Long Beach, her Master's of Education from Lesley University, and her doctorate in Equity and Leadership in Education at the University of Colorado, Denver. She is currently an associate professor in the School of Education at Metropolitan State University of Denver. Dr. Allen has served as the director of the Division of Early Learning and Youth Corrections with the Colorado Department of Human Services. Dr. Allen also serves as the president and CEO for the Institute of Racial Equity and Excellence, which is the lead agency for ensuring equity in educational practices throughout the nation. She is a national expert on implicit bias and culturally responsive practices, speaking at conferences across the country. We are honored to have you all with us for this series. Please join me in welcoming our speaker this evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor Carol and Alicia and everyone else who's helping us with the technology and translation. I am so excited to be here. Yesterday, we had a great time. Well, as great a time as you can have talking about race and equity and things like that. How many of you were here yesterday, last night? Okay, I see some of those hands going up. So these talks, this series has been tailored for different age groups. For those of you who were here yesterday, you may hear some of the same stories. We're going to talk about some of the same things, implicit bias and things like that. But as we begin to talk about talking to children about race, they will be customized to the age group. So hold on. Don't sit and think, oh, we did this yesterday, because it's going to be different. Okay. You promise to stay through? All righty. And you promise not to tell the stories? And you won't get bored with the same ones. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to share my screen. And while I'm getting this to work, I want you to know that this is not a passive workshop. I'm going to ask questions of you. I want you to interact. I want this to be very, very lively. So please let that chat box work for you. Ask questions, interject, give feedback. Again, we want it to be very, very interactive. So, talking to elementary age children about race, I'd like to start with just a couple of community norms. And the first is, this is a safe space. This is a safe space. I am going to tell you stories that still make me cringe. I don't present myself as a perfect facilitator or even a perfect person when it comes to this equity walk. I've made mistakes, I've fallen. I will share that with you because you know what? We all have, and we all do. And this is a place where we allow each other the space and the grace to grow. Have you ever been in a situation where you're afraid to reveal a mistake because you're afraid that someone will hold it against you, use it against you, hold it over your head? This is not that space. Because as we engage in this work, not only talking to children about race, talking to each other about race, but this whole equity walk, we are going to make mistakes. I promise you, you will. Like my daddy used to say, baby, it doesn't matter how hard you fall, just how fast you get up. You know, you get back on that horse and ride. So that's what I want you to do. And then there's some basic understandings here. I want us to really understand that we have a racial mess. And I'm so glad you all are here to talk about it. It's a mess. But guess what? We didn't create it. We inherited this. Like I said last night, I talked to a guy once and he was getting upset about the whole idea of talking about race and why it's necessary. And he said, Rosemarie, you know what? I have never, ever in my life, ever owned a slave. I said, that's amazing. And that's awesome. Because you know what? I've never, ever in my life been one. You've never owned a slave. I've never been a slave. But here we are in the middle of this mess. So we're not going to blame each other. There's no blame, no shame. And even though we didn't create this mess, we have a personal and professional responsibility to correct it. Another assumption, it's okay where you are. Some of you are just beginning this journey, just beginning to say to yourselves, I may have to start talking about this, especially with my children. And where you are is okay. But once you know better, you have to do better. Can we agree to those things? No blaming, no shaming. I'm going to share stories with you. I don't want you to judge me because after all, we're all human. So let's get started because I have a lot to say and I promise you this hour and a half is going to go by so fast. So here we go. Why in the world should we talk to children about race? Many people feel that children are too young. Let them be innocent. Don't take that away by talking about race. They don't get it. They don't understand it. That is not true. Some people say talking about race fuels racism. That's not true. The failure to talk about race actually contributes to racial inequities. And that whole idea about children being too young to talk about race, even as infants, babies, anybody have an infant at home? Babies notice race. They notice and respond to skin color cues about 6 months old. And little babies prefer the same race caregivers. We went into a lot of development, racial awareness development of infants. Yesterday, if you want to know a little bit more about that, just take a peek at that video. And by the time they're toddlers, by the time they're 2 years old, they show a strong preference for people in the same racial group. So we know children talk about, notice race before we ever imagined. So how do we speak to children about race? It begins with you. And it begins with you knowing who you are and what you're bringing to that conversation. So before I talk to you about how to talk to children about race, let's just talk about us and who we are. And we're going to start that conversation with implicit bias. Because even though we believe with our whole hearts that we treat people and see people as equals, science tells us that our hidden unconscious biases influence our perception and our actions and our behaviors towards other people. Now, implicit bias, it's a mental process, and it results in how we feel about people based on how we believe they're different from us. And it is a process that we're not aware of. We're not consciously aware of it, but it's based on experiences that we have had over the course of our lifetime. So I want you to imagine your core area, and those of you who work out know it's right here, kind of between your breastbone and your pelvic bone. And I want you to think about that core area, and I want you to imagine that there is an internal recording there that sits there, that's been there since you were born. And everything you've ever experienced, heard, smelled, tasted, every experience has been recorded on that recording since you came into the world. But the problem is that you don't know what's on that recording, that you have no idea. But just imagine that you are walking with your mom, say at 3 years old. And as you're walking through the park, you know those big giant geese that we get here? I don't know what you call them, but sometimes they're not really nice. And if you get close to them, especially in the spring, they will chase you and they can hurt you. So you're 3 years old, you go to pet one of the geese, you get away from your mom, and all of a sudden the two geese, the mom and dad, attacks. They're pecking at you and getting you, and your mom scoops you up and holds you tight, and she's trying to get away from the geese. And if you've ever been attacked, you know they don't give up very easily. And she's holding you up and she's kicking at the geese and she's trying to get you away from them. And finally, some help comes and you're safe. Now, you may have no memory at all about that incident. You're only 3. But now at 23, you're walking across the park, and all of a sudden, 2 geese get close to you. You are terrified. You get away from the geese, and your friends are like, "What's wrong with you?" "Oh, no, I don't like them." "Why not?" "I don't know. They're dangerous." You may have no idea, no remembrance of that incident, but it was recorded on your internal recording, and it shapes how you feel, how you respond, and how you behave towards geese. Do you see how that can happen? That's how implicit bias works. And it actually supports stereotypes and things that we have heard and seen and experienced. And this can be in any category. So when you look at dimensions of diversity, implicit bias shows up everywhere in cultural dimensions, ethnicity, ability, gender, identity, and isms, racism, sexism, homophobia, heterosexism, intolerance, xenophobia, and personal contextual factors, genetics, family history, lived experiences, relationality with your family, friends, community, ancestry, heritage, and systemic factors, historical, social, sociocultural, and political and economic context. So implicit bias shows up in lots of dimensions. But today, we're going to be focusing on racial bias. And people have said to me, you know, Rosemarie, it's not only about race. And they are absolutely right. It is not only about race, but it is always about race. And you may be wondering why, especially in areas, you know, you don't have a lot of diversity. So how is it always about race? Because no matter how you look at the data, and especially on every single indicator of child well-being, Black and brown children are at the bottom. The foundation of our problems in this country are racial. And it's really interesting because people say, well, you know, you can't talk about equity if you don't talk about ability. Yeah, equity refers to ability, but I'll tell you something. My son was diagnosed early with sensory integration processing disorder and auditory processing. Where are my special ed teachers? Anybody work with children with special ed? So you know what that looks like. And when he was 16 years old, and we live here in Lone Tree, very close to Highlands Ranch, if you don't know where that is in Douglas County. And right around the corner from us is a wonderful hiking area called the Bluffs, if you've ever been here. People come from everywhere to hike that little mountain, little hill, I guess. And his track team was going to meet there and run the Bluffs. And he said, Mom, I'm going to drive because afterwards we might go eat. It takes literally 5 minutes to drive around the corner. Now, a person with sensory integration processing issues, well, it shows up differently for different people, but for my son and I, it shows up in the way that we get lost. And it's not like, oh, I'm lost. You get really lost. You don't know where your body is in space. You begin to hyperventilate. You get very lightheaded and dizzy. It's a very scary situation. And before GPS, I would call my husband, call my sister, or call my best friend, and they knew how to help me. All I had to say is, I'm lost. And the first thing they would say is, calm down. I'm going to help you. Because it's a physiological response to not knowing where your body is in space. And even when you see something very similar, like I got lost not far from the house. And when I got to the corner of this street called Jordan and Lincoln Road, I saw McDonald's and I knew that McDonald's. And I thought, okay, that's McDonald's. I know I'm close. But I still couldn't figure out which way to turn. If I'm driving home, is McDonald's on my right or is it on my left? Which way is it? I don't know. And you're so worked up, you can't think. So my son got in the car, decided to drive around the corner 5 minutes. Now, 15 minutes later, he called me. Anybody can tell when their child is in trouble just the way they say, Mom? He called, he said, Mom? And I knew something wasn't right. And I said, it's okay. Just calm down and tell me what's happening. And he goes, where's the Bluffs? And I thought, where's the Bluffs? He's been gone 15 minutes. Where is he? And all I could think of is he's lost, he's disoriented, he's agitated, he's 6 feet. He is an African-American male in a very affluent area. That was my concern. My concern was him being a 6-foot Black man in an affluent area in a highly agitated state. So I grabbed my bag, I put my shoes on, and I said, just tell me what you see. Nothing. I said, it's okay. I'm on my way. I'm going to come get you. He goes, well, where is it? I said, I'll lead you to the Bluffs, but I have to get to you, son. So just look out the window and tell me what you see. And the 16-year-old said, cows. I'm thinking, oh, heavens, Where did he go where he's seeing cows? I mean, 15 minutes from here. So I'm trying to figure it out. And it actually turned out to be a great clue because it stopped me from going toward the city. I thought he's got to be between here and Castle Rock. So I'm just driving, trying to find him. And I said, how are you doing? He goes, I don't know where I am. I said, I know, baby, I know, but I'm on my way. And I talked to him and finally I found him. I was telling this to one of my white girlfriends. She goes, Rosemarie, why didn't you just call the police? I was trying to get there before the police. So my concern at that point wasn't my son's ability or disability. It was my son's race that was the biggest threat to him. So while it's not only about race, for children of color, people of color, communities of color, it is always about race. So we have to talk about this, and we have to understand how implicit racial bias works. It resides in our unconscious mind, and this yellow section right here, I want you to be aware of it because it's one of my favorites. And it says, unconscious attitudes are less egalitarian than we explicitly think about race. And all this is saying is that we all believe we're better than this. Do you know why we believe we're better than this? Because we want to be. That's why. You wouldn't be here tonight at 6:30 after working. Some of you worked at home, from home, watching babies and dogs, and teaching your children, and teaching other people's children, and all of the things that you did. But you ended up here, almost 300 of you, because we want to be better than this. And we want to talk to children and each other about race because I want you to as well, because our refusal to talk about it actually reinforces racial bias. So it's important for all of us to understand the causes of implicit racial bias so that we can be intentional about doing the work that we need to do to mitigate the negative consequences. So I like to use the ladder of inference. And I use this ladder just to provide a visual for how fast we engage in implicit bias. We go up the ladder very quickly. And it starts here, the first rung. I select data from what I observe. The minute you see someone, you size them up. The minute you walk into an environment, you size it up. It's just a very natural process. You select data, then you add meaning to the data you select. And the meaning that you add is based on your own cultural and personal beliefs. And this is where you make things up. And then you make assumptions based on the things you made up, based on your own cultural and personal values and experiences. And then you draw conclusions, you adopt beliefs about the world, and then you take action based on your beliefs. And this happens in milliseconds, and you don't even know it's happening. And again, you're just sizing people up. I'm going to choose someone in my square right now. And I see a person with curly hair, maybe a green shirt, very animated and engaged, not looking up at me at all. I wish I could see the name. I can't see the name. Maybe younger, dark hair, still looking down with a sharp chin. There you go. Just put a light on. I just saw that. Okay, I see kind of a smile. There you are. I see your smile. Now, I see you. And now I make assumptions about you. And the assumptions that I'm going to make, I'll say a first or second year teacher, loves athletics, maybe has a dog, very exuberant about life. I'm going to say lots of friends, maybe an extrovert. And see, they're shaking their head. Half of what I said wasn't true.
A little over half, yeah.
Okay, I see your name now, Pip. A little over half. But just by looking at Pip, I've made some assumptions about Pip that only half were true. And that's what we do when we meet people. We just look at them and we decide that these are the things that are true. Let me show you how this works in real life. Here's some observable data. Rosemarie walked right in and didn't speak to me. Now, I want to tell you that speaking is cultural. Some of you were raised to speak when you enter a room, that your job when you enter a room is to speak. And some of you were raised that when you enter a room, you enter quietly, you don't make yourself the center of attention, and you wait for an opening. Two different ways of entering a room. Now, I was raised to speak when I enter a room. If I walked into my grandma's house and she was sitting around talking to her sisters, not only must I speak, but I have to hug. Hi, Auntie Pam, hug, hug. Hi, Auntie Nat, hug, hug. Now, if I wanted to get in trouble, I could walk in and say, hi. I could hear my grandmother's voice right now. Girl, what's wrong with you? Do you see me over here and sitting down with your aunt? You better get yourself over here. What is your problem? So that's the way I was raised. But imagine the cultural disconnect with someone who was raised the other way. You know, it's so funny. I work with Dorothy Chaplin, Dr. Chaplin, and she was my son's teacher, and now we work together. Well, she heard me give this talk, and she said, Rosemarie, it all makes sense to me now, because I never understood why she never spoke. She would walk down our hallway, go into her office and open the door and sit. And I thought, why doesn't she speak when she comes? And not only did she not speak when she came, but she never told me she was leaving when she left. I just go to her office. It's like, oh, she's gone. And I thought that was wild. How can you leave? So the same way I was taught to speak when I enter a room is the same way I was taught to say goodbye when I leave. Cultural disconnects. Anybody else raised that way? How many of you were raised to speak when you enter a room? And how many, okay, so I see some. How many like, no, just kind of wait for an opening? Okay, so you see the difference? So now you have an assignment. The next time we all get together after COVID and you're having a meeting, watch the way people enter a room, enter the meeting. It's the funniest thing when you start watching. You'll see people raised like me go, hey, hey, have to speak to everyone. And then you'll see people who are taught not to, who walks in, sits at their table and put their things down, they're ready to go. But anyway, back to the ladder of inference. Rosemarie rushed right past me without even speaking. So I'm going to add my own personal and cultural cultural meaning. Rosemarie, did you see that? That she had an attitude. She walked right past us and didn't even bother to speak. I'm going to make assumptions. She thinks she's better than us. She doesn't like us. She thinks she's better. She walked right past us and didn't even speak. And then I'm going to draw conclusions based on what I made up. She'll never treat us fairly. Girl, I might start looking for a new job. And because she's the vice principal and we just started and we're first year teachers, she doesn't value us because she didn't even bother to speak to us. You see how fast you can go up that ladder? Let's try another one. Observable data. This child is big and rough. Let's just say he's a big Latinx child. He's big and he looks rough. Then we add our own personal and cultural meaning. You know what? I spoke to him and he didn't even speak. I think he has an attitude and he's so big. They say he's 7, but he looks like he's 10. And then I make assumptions. You know what? He's big and he is not friendly. He might be aggressive. And if he's aggressive, he could hurt the other children. And then I draw conclusions based on my belief. Oh my goodness, because he's big, he doesn't speak, he's not friendly, and he could be aggressive. We're probably going to have to put him on a behavioral plan. And that's how fast you go up the ladder. And this scenario is actually based on research. First, the research of adultification of Black and brown boys especially, where they are thought to be 4.5 years older than they are, even by teachers who know child development. If you're close to a Black or brown child, ask them how old people think they are, especially a boy. Just say, you know what, I learned something. And they say, how old do people think you are when you meet them? It's almost consistent across the board. Has anyone here on Zoom call experienced that? Been thought to be older? Yeah. My son always, but he was taller. And one day he was throwing a tantrum and someone said, he needs to stop acting like a 2-year-old. I said, he is a 2-year-old. Adultification, read about that. It's really amazing, but we go up this ladder so quick and no one's immune. We do. I want you to think about the times you've gone up the ladder. And while you're thinking, I'm going to share with you one of my most painful experiences going up that ladder and engaging in implicit bias. And this happened a few years ago when my son was a student at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Anybody familiar with that area? And back then, the area where Howard is, it was deemed a dangerous area. Its reputation was one that was dangerous and under-resourced and underserved. And we were hesitant to allow him to go, but he grew up right here in Lone Tree in Douglas County, many times the only Black child in his classes. And he really wanted to go to an HBCU, a historical Black college and university. And we thought it would be great for him. So he went, did very, very, very well. It's really where he found himself. And his second year, at the end of his second year, between sophomore and junior year, he wanted to move off campus. Now, implicit bias shows up more in a few situations. One, when you have to make snap decisions, when you are afraid, and when you don't have enough information. Snap decisions, fear, and ignorance. Perfect recipe for implicit bias to impact your decisions. So, when he told us he wanted to move off campus, it was scary. He actually created a PowerPoint, showed my husband and I how much money we would save, showed his grades, and all of his grades. I've done so well. Everything that you expected, I've met those expectations. This is how much money you'll save. And he was vegan and he was gluten-free, dairy-free. I don't have to worry about trying to find food in the cafeteria, and you don't have to pay double for food. And then I can cook my own food. He just had all these wonderful reasons. And we said, okay. But once I said, okay, my heart was racing. It's like I have to find him a safe place, close enough to school where he doesn't have to drive, and where he can walk even in bad weather. So I found a place online. I had him go meet the people. There were 4 other graduate students. It was a 5-bedroom house. He met them. He loved them. They loved him, ready to sign the lease, but I wasn't ready yet. You know, I turned into that mama bear. I had to see this place and I had to meet the people. So I flew to DC to see the house and to meet the people. And now remember, sensory integration processing issue. Remember I told you how my son gets lost? I have it too, and that happens to me when I'm lost. So keep that in mind. So anyway, I put the address in my GPS. He's in class, so he can't meet me. So I'm already set to go and meet the house manager. So I get in my car and I'm driving, I'm feeling really good. And I'm about to turn left. And as I'm about to turn left, I notice I'm on the right street. That's a great feeling. Anybody drive in DC? When you know you're on the right track, it's a great feeling. Like, there it is, there's a house. I make the left turn and I'm ready to park. And just as I'm pulling over to park, I look at the house next door. And standing on the porch is a rather large, very dark Black man. And he's standing there. And I took one look and went straight up the ladder. My first thought is, oh no, my son can't live here, it's too dangerous. My next thought was, I hope the housing office is open because I need his dorm room back. Remember, this is milliseconds. And my third thought was, what the heck just happened? What the heck just happened? That realization that I engaged in behavior that I've dedicated my entire life to fight against was so overwhelming to me, for me. The sense of shame and unworthiness, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was so ashamed that I put my hands on the steering wheel. It's amazing to me that every time I tell the story, I feel it. I still feel it. And I put my hands on my head and I just sobbed. And I cried and I cried and I cried. And you know, that self-talk. How did you do this? You've been fighting against this. This is what happens to Black men all the time. And you're supposed to be better than this. And you just did this. And I'm just crying. I mean, just ugly, cry all my makeup off crying. And I'm just sitting there crying and crying. And then it hit me that I've been sitting there too long. And I looked up and the guy was looking at me and I looked at him and our eyes caught and he saw that I was crying and he ran downstairs and he came to the window and, lady, are you okay? And as he was running down the stairs toward the car, I'm like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. You know what I wanted to do? I wanted to take off. And I almost talked myself into it. It was like, he doesn't know you. This is a rental car. Just go. He'll never know. But I didn't. And I stayed. I stayed because I really wanted to face it. I wanted to face the fear. And I'm going to ask you when you get into situations like this to stay and face the fear. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Just work through it and face it. But I still needed an excuse why I was sitting in my car crying. So he came down and he's asking, I rolled the window down and I said, hold on, I'll get out. And I fixed myself up. He goes, are you okay? Are you crying? What's the matter? Are you all right? Do you need help? And I said, no, I'm okay. Yes, that's a picture of me. I'm not frozen. Here I am. So I said, I'm okay. He says, well, what's the matter? And I said, well, I think I'm lost. And when I get lost, I get really lost because I have sensory processing issues. And then I get disoriented and I'm just going on and on and on. And the guy goes, calm down, calm down. What address are you looking for? And I told him, he goes, ma'am, you're right here. I'm like, thank you. By this time I got it all together and I started talking to him. And I said, my son's, he's a student at Howard and he's going to be living here. Are you a student at Howard? And he goes, kind of, not really. I'm a resident at the hospital. I go to the medical school. I'm like, oh, wow. I would have missed that. I would have missed that. But he did not have to be a future doctor. He could have been a janitor, a faculty member, a Walmart worker, a street sweeper. He could have been homeless. But what he should not have been was deemed dangerous simply because he was a Black man standing on his porch. And I did that. I did it. And can I be honest? I didn't think it was possible for me to do it. If anyone would have told me I was capable of it, I would have said they were not telling the truth. There's no way that could have been true, that I was capable of doing that because, like I said last night, I love Black men, love them. My daddy, my first love, all of his brothers, my uncles who raised me and coddled me and took care of me. I mean, when I was in college, they sent me baskets. When I go to church, I don't know if you have had this experience where they put a couple of dollars in their hand and just pass it to me and kiss the hand, just that kind of love. My husband, my son, my brother. I've never had an awful experience with a Black man. How did that happen to me? That I could look at one who literally looked like my husband, and I mean literally, and decide that Black man standing on his porch made the neighborhood too dangerous for my Black son. That's implicit bias. And that's how it works. And if I'm capable of it, as long as I've been doing this work and as much as I love Black men, imagine what you're capable of. We're all capable of it, but we all want to be better. So we have to do the work to be better. So implicit bias, we form these implicit evaluations based on inaccurate information and stereotypes, and we are all bombarded with stereotypes. It makes it hard to live up to our value of equity and fairness. It creates real world barriers, and implicit biases are not aligned with who we think we are explicitly. And implicit bias disrupts our conscious commitment to fairness and equity. So we have to talk about this. We must, because you know what? We are all biased. And for those of you who think you're not, and I'm going to say this with all the love in my heart, for those of you who think you're not biased, you're the most dangerous because there's no check and balance system. There's nothing that stops you and interrupts it. And then you believe that you're right about people, and it can be very, very dangerous. But I want you to know that aware is halfway there. When we are aware of our biases, we're halfway. We still have work to do, the other half, but at least we're halfway there. And it starts with talking about the issues. We have to talk about this because if we don't, we can't address it. So that means we have to talk about race. I love this graphic because it's like, oh no, I don't want to do that. It is so hard to do. We don't like to talk about race. We've become so politically correct that we have no idea what to say, who to say it to, what the labels are. Do I say Latina? Do I say Latinx? Do I say Hispanic? When I grew up in Los Angeles, it was Chicana and Chicano. Do I say Asian? I have a girlfriend who's Chinese. My Chinese friend, my friend who is Chinese, and my friend who is Afghan from Afghanistan, we went to lunch. And my friend Shelly from China said, Rosemarie, I'm Chinese. And I'm like, yeah, I know. She goes, no, really, I'm Chinese. And I stopped and I said, tell me more, because she wasn't smiling. And I thought she was joking at first. I said, tell me more. She goes, I'm so annoyed that people label me as Asian. And I don't know who gets to name us, but I'm Chinese. My dad is Chinese. My mother's Chinese. My grandparents and great grandparents are Chinese. And I am Chinese. I am not Asian. And my girlfriend from Afghanistan said, oh, I'm Asian. I'm like, what? And I'm like, okay, tell me more about you being Asian, because I thought you were Afghan. She goes, oh, I'm from Afghanistan, but I'm Asian. I said, tell me more. She goes, on what continent do you think Afghanistan is? It's like, oops, didn't think about that. So when I marked the box, I marked Asian. We don't know what to say. So now, since Shelly told me that she's Chinese, I am terrified to group people together as Asian. So you see, we're just scared. We don't know what to say. And do I say Black? Do I say African American? We don't know. Let me just give you an example of what happened even in my family with labels. So I am born in 1959. I turned 62 April 1st. My husband is 10 years older than me. So he's born in 1949. He will be 72 this year. When my husband was born in the segregated South in 1949, use your chat box for this. What race do you think they put on his birth certificate? Oh, yes, some of you got it. Colored. Absolutely. You know, you all are amazing. It's very rare anyone guesses that. My husband is colored. And every now and then I tease him and I say, come on over here, big old colored boy. I can say that, you can't. Always good to know what not to say. And another thing that's happening that I want you to be aware of is, and I see this with my students, because we say people of color, some of my students are starting to say colored people. No, don't do that. Highly, highly, highly offensive. If you ever called my husband a colored man, that would, no. So colored people is not synonymous with people of color. So my husband is colored. 10 years later, 1959, what am I? Not Black, Ashley. Negro. Yes, I am Negro. And in 1983, when my daughter was born, what do you think she is? She is Black. 11 and a half years later, when my son was born, what do you think he is? African American. And that's a family living right here today with all these labels. No wonder we're confused. We don't know. We don't know how to keep up. We don't know what to say. And the key is we don't want to offend. Someone said in the chat box that they have one Black boy in their class, and the teacher and the mentor teacher, they fumble over Black or African American because they don't want to offend. And she said, I hate admitting that. I'm so thankful that you did, because we're not perfect. Remember I said, we have to tell our stories. None of us are perfect. We're going to fumble over this stuff. And I'm glad that you notice it, because it's so uncomfortable first to talk about race, and then you don't want to offend anyone. People say, Rosemarie, people I know, do you prefer Black or African American? I don't have a preference. But when you have a relationship with children, their families, you can ask. You can say, you know, which do you prefer, Black or African American? So someone asked, what's the difference between a Black and colored person? It's a Black person, but the label of colored is offensive. This was a label that was given right after the 13th Amendment, and it was derogatory. It was just one step down from the N-word, you know, and it was almost always coupled with girl or boy. Hey, little color gal, color boy. And Black people were not ever referred to as Mr. or Mrs. And some of you may have had Black children in your classroom, like a Black boy, for instance, named Mr. Has anyone ever had a Black child named Mr.? That became a very popular first name because Black people were denied that title so long that some Black parents named their children Mr. as the first name, so they would always be referred to as Mr. And that's another reason why titles in the African American community are so important. You will notice, many of you may have noticed that when children are introduced to you by a Black family, they always call you, oh, this is Miss So-and-so, or this is Mr. So-and-so. Have you noticed that? Titles are very important because they were denied. The African American community were denied titles for many years, all the way up through the 50s. Someone else said they absolutely fumble over Black and African American. Someone else said I have an emotional reaction when people use that term instead of person of color. The signs that were used during segregation, absolutely. My husband has a reaction to that colored. Remember the colored only and white only? So that's a big trigger as well. So yes, so titles are very, very important. Continue to ask those questions. Another reason that we don't like to talk about race is because it feels personal. People are afraid that they'll be blamed. There's a lot of white shaming going on. Some of you may have attended conferences where you left crying and feeling wounded and worse than when you came. That's not what this workshop or any workshops I ever facilitate is about. Like I said, we didn't create this mess. We have a responsibility to clean it up, but we didn't create it. So the white shaming, like the guy said to me, I never owned slaves. No. You benefit from the residual effects the same way everyone does. That idea of privilege that we didn't ask for, that was just put on us, and there are lots of categories of that. We didn't ask for it, so we don't have to blame each other for it. We can heighten awareness of it and work together to mitigate the negativity and the negative consequences. And people of color are terrified of being accused of playing the race card. And then a lot of people get defensive, especially if you're white and you've never had to talk about race. And now all of a sudden it's necessary. But this group came because you want to talk about race. So I'm preaching to the choir. Some people have been taught that it's not polite. Don't talk about it. That's been part of racial etiquette. Or colorblind ideology. I don't see race, I just see people. So these are ways that we really don't talk about the issue of race. And I want you to think about, and if you don't mind sharing, this is a space where I want you to feel safe, but how many of you were taught to be colorblind? Were you taught to be colorblind? And are you comfortable talking about race? So let's just see if you feel comfortable putting it in the chat. Taught to be colorblind. Yes, definitely taught in the 70s. Absolutely. My dad dated a Black man and it didn't seem to be an issue or a big deal. I was taught to be colorblind. So yes, lots of people were taught to be colorblind and thought it was really rude to identify people by race. Someone said between the ages of 6 and 8, I was beat up because I was white growing up in Hawaii. So you had that experience of being a minority in Hawaii. Taught to be colorblind. Someone else, it was never brought up in my household. Grew up in the 90s and taught to be colorblind by boomer parents. Yes. Some other people, I was not taught to be colorblind by my parents, but elsewhere. And that's funny because even in society, we were taught to be colorblind. When I first moved here, I had a family identify as Mexican, and I said that to my boss, and she goes, "You can't say that here." And I said, I can't say what? She said, "You can't say Mexican." I said, "But they said they were Mexican. I don't care if they said you can't say it." And I thought, wow, this is different because I'm from Los Angeles and that was typical. And I said, well, what should I say? And she said, well, just say Spanish. And I was thinking, but they're not from Spain. But, I was new here and a new job and I didn't want to make any waves, but it scared me so much that I never identified anyone as Mexican. Well, until later when I realized that that was ridiculous. So we are all over the place but mostly people were taught to be colorblind. Even someone was raised in a family where they had racist jokes being said, but denied being racist, all of that. But I'm seeing people are becoming more and more comfortable talking about race. We have to, and we have to avoid, absolutely avoid at all costs, this colorblind ideology that many of us grew up with. We must, because when we engage in that colorblind ideology, issues of equity are avoided. And then it promotes this illusion that we're beyond race and racism, and it ignores the racial disparities and the data. And then we blame the behavior on people and communities of color. And then it contributes to racial inequities because it invalidates the experiences and identities of people of color. Let me give you an example of a real world event, well, not event, but phenomenon that's happening right now. I believe this is please forgive me if I'm wrong, teachers, I've been out of the classroom for a little bit, but is it the Ready to Read week where we uplift Dr. Seuss? That's right. So everyone's doing this whole thing about Dr. Seuss, but you also are seeing that a lot of people and agencies are pulling back because of the racist history and the foundation of Dr. Seuss and his books. So you may find that people of color right now are saying, this is very offensive to me. It's very offensive to my child. Can we choose other books? So we invalidate these experiences when we say, oh, that was then. Oh, that's not what they mean. The same way when Indigenous people say that we don't want to be mascots. Oh, it's all in fun. Oh, you're being too sensitive. No, we have to listen to what people tell us about their experiences. And when someone is telling you about an experience, and now I'm going into a whole new workshop on microaggressions, but I'll save that. But when someone tells you that something offends you, that's not the time to defend it. It's the time to listen and stop doing it. As simple as that. When I was running the lab school at Front Range Community College years ago, we had a little kind of a hole in the middle of the floor where children played and sat, and we called it the kiva. Oh, let's meet in the kiva. Oh, I'm going to build baklaks in the kiva. Let's dance in the kiva. And one of my Indigenous students came, and after class, she goes, Rosemarie, I have to tell you that I had a visceral reaction every time you called that place the kiva, because the kiva is a sacred space for my people. It's a holy space. It's where we pray. And I said, thank you so much for telling me. The next morning, we had a class meeting. I said, guess what? I learned something new. I learned that a real kiva is a space where the Indigenous people pray, and it's a holy space. And when we call this space a kiva, it hurts people's feelings. Because is this a holy space? No. Is this a sacred space? No. Well, we need to change the name so that we don't hurt the feelings of people who use a kiva as a holy and sacred space. So what should we call it? And my little Connor jumped up and said, let's call it the pit. And from that moment forward, it was the pit. That's it. That was it. And it was just that simple. And that's how simple it is. So keeping that in mind. So not only can we not be colorblind, we can't be culture blind. We have to understand that everyone has a culture. And you as teachers and family members and medical people, all of you here today who touch the lives of children somehow, you have to know the culture that you're bringing into the space with you, because who you are outside of school is exactly who you are inside. And we have to understand that white people also have a culture. And why do I feel a need to say that? Because in the 80s and 90s, we made a mistake. We defined everything as multicultural and diverse as everything that wasn't white. And this led people, especially I see this in my students, to believe that white people don't have a culture. And how are we defining culture? It is your way of being. It's your practices, your customs, the way you do things, your belief system. Someone once said, you know what culture is, Rosemarie? It's the stuff you teach your children so they could be liked. And I thought, that's kind of true. So everyone has a culture. And when we recognize ourselves as cultural beings, then we can stop othering people and normalizing this while othering that. So I want you to be aware that you bring your cultural background with you everywhere, your beliefs, your perceptions, your personal identities, and your cultural practices. And these things will shape how you talk to your children about race. And the reason we have to talk about race and culture is because we don't know each other very well. We don't know each other really at all because we're more segregated now than we have ever been in the history of this country, except for slavery. Even we're more segregated now than we were before Brown versus Board of Education. And I just want to tell you a quick story because I can't believe how fast time is going. When I moved to Parker, Colorado in 1994, we were the only Black person in our whole subdivision, maybe one of 15 in the whole town. And I was pregnant with two other women who lived on my cul-de-sac. And after we had our babies, we brought them out and we're talking about how long was your labor and how much did she weigh? You know, all the things that mom talked about and blah, blah, blah. And I looked at my neighbor's son and I said, oh my goodness, his eyes are so blue. They're blue. I've never seen eyes that blue. And she goes, yes. And I think they'll stay. Huh? I was so confused. And I said, okay. And I went in the house and I told my husband. I said, honey, I complimented her baby's eyes. And she said, yes, she thinks they'll stay. He goes, well, what does that mean? I said, I don't know. But he said, maybe you misheard her. I said, no. She said it and she was smiling. He goes, honey, you misunderstood because where are the eyes going to go? You know, it's like they're going somewhere. You know, that feeling that you've missed something culturally. So I'm like, no, there's something I don't understand. Because she was proud and she smiled and I know I heard what I heard. So I called my friend. Now, I have friends from all races, nationalities, except for cultures, religions, and I have really close friends that I can call and ask questions that I'd be far too embarrassed to ask anybody else. I advise you to have those friends. So I called my friend Ann Ray. And when we call about racial questions, we start out, she'll say, Rosemarie, Black girl question. So I called her and I said, Ann Ray, white girl question. She goes, okay, shoot. And I told her what happened. She said, Rosemarie, you know that all babies are born with blue eyes and they change. No. First, all babies are not born with blue eyes. And they change to what? She's like, oh, you really don't know this. I said, nope, I don't. And she said, some babies are born with blue eyes and then they change colors. I'm like, what do you mean they change colors? They go like from light blue to dark blue. Tell me more about this. What? How does that happen? She goes, oh, honey, a baby can be born with blue eyes and they can change to brown. I'm like, what? So how does that work? Do they go to sleep with blue eyes and open their eyes the next morning and they're brown? I mean, how does this happen? And we had this whole talk about the whole blue eye thing. And then she dropped another bomb and she said, guess what? The hair changes too. And that was when I learned that you can be born with blue eyes and blonde hair and with no intervention whatsoever end up as a brown-haired, brown-eyed person. Who knew? Not me. Never had a white baby. Never. I had no idea at all. But that's because we don't talk about this stuff. There's some things about me you don't know. There's some things you don't know about Black girls. Let me tell you first. Some Black girl hair rules. Anybody know the number one Black hair rule of all time? Don't touch it. Yes, that is the rule. Do not touch our hair. Do you know our own men don't touch our hair? I don't know where it comes from. I said yesterday, I found a film called The History of Black Hair. That will give you some insight, but everybody I know, most Black families, when their children leave for school, they say some of the same things. Be good, do what your teacher says, try hard, don't let nobody touch your hair. It's just taboo. You do not touch a Black person's hair. Now, those of you who are teachers on here, it's important for you to know that so you can teach your students not to touch their hair. If you go on YouTube, you even find people taking off another person's hijab. You teach this in a way that says we do not touch people's bodies without consent. As kindergarten, first and second grade teachers, this is a fine time to talk about consent. Consent. You do not touch a person's hair. Let me show you a person breaking this rule while ordering food. Makes me cringe. And look how nicely she tells her not to do it. And when I watch this, seriously, it makes my heart race. I don't know how she stood there and took it, but I can only imagine, this is in my imagination, that she was planning what she would say, that she was probably calming herself down so she didn't slap her hand away. But look at the entitlement here, because not only did she touch her hair, but then she went and touched her hand. After the woman's telling her not to touch her, look at her. See, she's not touching, and then she touches her. So we want to be really, really careful about that. Someone says, and for teachers, this means you. Do not touch any Black children's hair. Don't ask to touch their hair. Don't. It's just taboo. Taboo. You don't want to do that. And Sydney, you're absolutely right when you said she doesn't want to be the angry Black woman. It's a whole nother workshop I can tell you about how that stereotype guides so much behavior for Black women, for Black moms who may want to come to you and tell you something about their children, for Black teachers. Anyway, here's a little girl. I'm sorry. Now, just imagine her mother said, with those beautiful beads in her hair, be good, listen to your teacher, do your best, and don't let nobody touch your hair, girl. And you better come back here with the same amount of beads you left with. And just imagine this. Say cheese. Cheese. See that? Did you see that look? Don't touch my hair. Do you know that little Black girls are 19% of the female preschool population, but 54% of those who are suspended from school? Number two reason is hair. So if this little hand didn't stop, just imagine if she pushed it away, who do you think would be in trouble? She would, especially if you don't understand the cultural rules around hair, because you might think it's only hair. What's the big deal? But we have to be aware and talk about culture. We can't be culture blind. So we have to talk to children about race. In order to do that, you have to develop a comfort level about race yourselves. And because so many of you were raised to be colorblind, you're going to have to work especially hard to develop a comfort level about this so you can talk to children about it. Because children are not too young at all. So let's talk about the stages of racial awareness, especially what it looks like in elementary school. I want to start with a short film.
We're debuting a really important 360 special report called Kids on Race, The Hidden Picture. It's a project over a year in the making. Now, race relations, one of the most explosive issues in this country, and for many adults, the most taboo to talk about with kids. But what a lot of adults don't realize is that kids, even as young as 6 years old, are already talking about or thinking about race. And what they say is making friends with kids of other races is hard and only gets harder as they grow up. We teamed up with renowned child psychologist, Dr. Melanie Killen, to scientifically measure children's attitudes on race. Take a look at this. Dr. Killen and her team showed 6-year-old children this picture and asked them questions like, what's happening here? Are these children friends? And would their parents want them to be friends? The picture is designed to be ambiguous. What's happening is in the eye of the beholder. Then they showed them this picture and asked the same question. Now, the only difference in the pictures, the race of the children was flipped. Both white and African-American children were tested, and in addition to the 6-year-olds, the psychologist showed a similar set of pictures to 13-year-olds. At our request, they also asked kids open-ended questions about race to try to understand how it plays into their own lives. The responses were raw. Some of the experiences they described were frankly shocking. This is the reality of what kids see, hear, and think about race. Listen.
If you have the same skin, You can play together, but if you don't have the same skin, you can't play together.
So why can't you play together if you have different color skin?
Because your mom might not want you to play with that friend.
It's okay to tell people that they can't be your friend because of the color of their skin?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that okay?
Because your mom will not want them to be the same, be a different color friends.
Do you think it'd be easy for a kid to convince his parents that it would be okay to have other types of people over? Why not?
Probably because you might get in trouble.
Why would a parent want you to get in trouble if you wanted someone to come over to your house who is a different skin color?
Probably because they don't allow.
Why not? Why would some parents not allow other skin colored kids to come over?
Probably because they might not like that skin color.
Interesting. Who did they say would have a problem? They didn't say they didn't want to play with a person in a different skin color. Moms. So this is what I want you to understand, that when we don't talk to children about race, they create their own reality based on their limited information, based on limited knowledge. So I don't believe for a minute that either one of those children's families said you couldn't have a child of a different race be your friend. It could happen, but I just don't want to believe that. But this might give you some insight as to why the child said that or thought that or believed that.
Responses like this might begin to explain.
Do you think it would be as easy to ask your mom to have someone over who's the same skin color and someone over who's a different skin color?
Yeah, that might be hard.
What about it might be hard?
Because all my people in my family are white and not mostly people that my mom knows and dad knows are black or brown.
Yeah. So it might be kind of hard to ask your mom to have a friend over who's black or brown.
You see that? Picking up social cues. That's how children learn about race when we don't talk to them. And the social cue was, my mom doesn't have any black friends. My dad doesn't have any black friends, black or brown. And we don't know any people like that. And they've never been to our house. So that it's not allowed. You see how you know how kids think. So that's what made him think that he wasn't allowed to have black friends over. This is why we have to talk to children about
Responses
race.
like this.
We must, because children form their own understanding with little guidance from parents or other adults. As children naturally categorize people based on skin color, they develop their own ideas as they watch and they listen to adults for cues. Someone in the chat box said that a person took their child to the doctor and a little black boy asked the child to play, and the white child said no because you're black. Then the mother did a beautiful thing. She sat down and started playing with the child to demonstrate for her children. But we have to be aware of the social messages that we are promoting, because children, by the time they're 5 or 6, have the same level of implicit bias as the adults in their environment. Black and Hispanic children show no preference towards their own group compared to whites. But on the other hand, white children, they remain strongly biased in favor of their whiteness. Let me show you an example. Oh, I thought that was an example. Let's see if it's going to come up. So 5 and 6-year-olds have the same level of bias as adults. They're interested in how people get skin color, and they can understand simple scientific explanations about skin color differences. Those of you who may be science teachers, talk about melanin, how people from warmer climates historically have more melanin and those from colder climates don't because they didn't need it. You can teach about race through every topic, through literature, through science, through math, everything. Children at this age may use prejudicial insults and name calling to show anger or aggression. If a child in this age group or in elementary uses the N-word, don't tell the other child they don't know what it means. What they know is that it hurts. When someone uses a racial slur, a homophobic slur, a slur against Muslims, Islamophobia slur, they may not know how to define it, but they know it's a word that hurts people. So please don't say, oh, they don't know what that meant. Very important. And don't accept parents saying they don't know what that meant, but address it. How does this work when one parent is biracial? It depends on how that child is identifying, but what I'm finding more and more, which is beautiful, is that biracial children are no longer being forced to choose a side. Do you know teachers used to do that? People, society, well, which one are you going to identify with? I loved it when Meghan Markle said, I am biracial, I will not deny my father nor my mother. So we're seeing that more and more. So by the age of 6, children can be conscious of social stereotypes, and then they naturally attribute positive traits to their own ethnic and racial groups. Sometimes. Here's one example.
Show me the smart child. Okay, why is she the smart child?
Because she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the mean child. Okay, why is she the mean child?
Because she's way darker.
Okay. Show me the good child. Why is she the good child?
Because I think she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the bad child. Why is she the bad child?
Because she's a lot darker.
Show me the ugly child. Why is she the ugly child?
Because she's like a lot darker.
What do you think?
Interesting. And I love that she said the smart child looked like her, because I think she looks like me. But I have to tell you, this does not happen to Black and brown children. This is loosely based off of the Daw study. If you go to YouTube and put in Daw study, and you see that white children identify the white Daw as the smartest, as the prettiest, and Black children identify the white Daw as the smartest and the prettiest. Let me show you an example. So Black children do not
Provocative
see
answers
themselves
during
that
her
way.
test. I asked her about them later.
How about you? Why do you want that skin color?
Because it looks lighter than this kind, because this looks a lot like that one.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't like the way brown looks, because the way brown looks really nasty for some reason, but I don't know what reason. That's all.
So you think it looks nasty?
Well, not really, but sometimes.
Sometimes. And Brielle, they asked what color adults don't like. Do you remember what you said? That's right. That's what you said. Why do you think adults don't like that color?
Dark.
Dark. And adults, you think adults don't like dark?
Well, maybe some adults do, but maybe some of them don't.
The questions.
Heartbreaking. Those of you who are teachers or who have influence over children's lives, this is why positive racial identity is important. This is why. Think about Alicia's story when she opened us up. Doesn't every child deserve to look at a person with their skin color and think they're smart because they look like me? To think they're pretty because they look like me? I want you to be aware of this. If you want to see this entire clip, it's Children on Race with, it's a study by CNN and Anderson Cooper.
Provocative answer.
So children have already, at this age group, have already learned to associate some groups with higher status, more positive value over others. By the time they're 7 years old, white children perceive that Black children feel less pain. When we talk to 5 and 6 year olds about race, we want to start by talking about how some people might treat others differently based on the color of their skin. Be very specific about the action children can take. You can say things like, sometimes people don't treat others kindly because their skin is different. Do you think that's okay or kind? You can frame these conversations around fairness. for children 7 to 10, this is where it's going to be hard because you're going to talk about race, but you can't avoid racism. You got to talk about racism, and that's tough. Talking to children about racism and racialized violence is hard, but it's very necessary. So you're saying, Dr. Allen, how do I do that? Let's talk about how you do it. First, conversations are going to be different depending on the child and the family's racial and ethnic backgrounds. Generally speaking, communities of color speak to their children much more often about race because they have to protect them and prepare them to live in a racialized society. But it's very important that you not spare children from the truth. Now, you don't have to say frightening, terrible, scary things, but don't sugarcoat it by being vague. Don't say, so for instance, if the children saw the video of George Floyd, and they say, what happened? Why did they do that? Don't say, some people aren't kind. Too vague. That's nothing. You can say that police, there's a thing called police brutality, and Black people aren't treated very well. And what happened to George Floyd was wrong, and that officer never should have put his knee on his neck. And to say things, don't be vague. Be purposeful and intentional. And you're going to have to use these words you're afraid of. Black, white, African American, Latinx, Asian, Chinese. Use the words. That's why you're going to have to be comfortable talking about these things. And then you have to emphasize that racism is wrong. Call it wrong. Racism is wrong. When people treat people differently because of their skin color, it is wrong. Talk about how wrong it is, and then point out instances in the media and books and videos and say, this is wrong, and we don't agree with this. Even in your classrooms, this is wrong, and our classrooms are a safe space for everybody. So when a child says something, you have to have a treasure chest of responses that you will already have ready. Because when a child says something, you're going to be so neutralized, you won't know what to say. I don't want to play with them because they're brown and they're dirty. And you're like, what do I say? Have that treasure chest ready. Begin to develop ready responses. And a good one is, we don't treat people differently because of their skin color. This is wrong, and we don't agree with it. This is a safe space, not here. Be emphatic. And let children know it is wrong. And then you also want to talk about hope. You don't want the world to be a horrible, terrible place. My son is an activist, and I worry about him constantly because he's so deeply involved with equity work that I fear he's going to lose his hope that things will get better. Talk about hope. It's so important to talk about hope, and it empowers children. We want to empower them to know that they can make a difference, that they have the power to change things. They can stand up to racism. They can interrupt racism. They can tell you when it happens. We can teach them to push back against racist policies, practices, and ideas. We can ask children, what can we do to help? Yes, that was wrong. What happened to your friend? What can we do to help? And then you can suggest actions. We can write letters to the people who make the rules. We can vote for people. So that just help children understand that they can take action and it's not hopeless. So here are some recommendations for talking to children about race, and I'll get into those in 1 second. Let me just see if there are any questions in the chat box. I'm not watching as carefully, so Alicia and other people on the team, if there's something I need to know right away, please interrupt and let me know. Because I can't believe it, but we're running out of time. So here are some recommendations. First, examine your own understanding about race. If race wasn't discussed in your household growing up, then you have to do some research on your own, and then you're going to have to reflect on what it brings up for you. Do a little bit of research, especially the history of inequities, and then be aware of your own responses to it. The more you understand about race and what it means and how it permeates our society, the better equipped you are to teach your children about it. Very, very important. If you go on YouTube, I have a session that is recorded. I believe it's called The History of Inequities in America. And I take you from 1619 all the way through. So you can see how race was codified in our laws. You might want to take a look at that. And then become comfortable with the terminology and familiar with how certain concepts are used. Not that you're going to become an expert, and like we already noted, these concepts may change over time. But for example, race and culture are not synonymous. And DEI, people say, oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are 3 different things. Find out what they are, the definition of them. Be explicit with children and use accurate terms so that they can learn how to apply them. I'm trying to look at, oh yes, Sydney says the book about Black children sitting together in the cafeteria. That's a really good one. And we'll give you some book lists as well. Also, when your child brings up a topic related to race, don't be afraid to keep the conversation going. Please, please, please don't shush them, because then you're teaching them to suppress their curiosity, and then they will grow up like so many of us, and not talking about race. And we have to break this cycle. So it's okay to let children know that it's okay to talk about race. Instead of telling kids to keep quiet or refrain from using particular words or make observations out loud, talk to them. I told the story yesterday. I was at a supermarket and a little guy was running in front of his mom. And as he turned the corner, he almost slammed into me. And he stopped and he looked at me and said, "Hey, you're Black." And I said, "Yeah, I am. And you're white and your eyes are blue." I said, "My eyes aren't blue. My eyes are brown." He goes, "Well, my eyes are blue." I said, "I know. I see your blue eyes. Mine are brown. And you're white and I'm Black." And then his mom came. And I was so thankful for that, those special seconds where the mom wasn't horrified. He caught her, what, she is Black, or did she offend? But it was just a nice, wonderful, casual conversation. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Anna Ura, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, had a really good question, I think, from an educator perspective. And so I just copied it back in here with quotes so you didn't have to scroll up. I didn't know if you could read it and then address it for the educators that are on.
Absolutely. To Anna's,
thank you.
In a text with racist terms mandatory.
So go up one, the longer one in quotes. That was her question I copied.
A class of young children that includes racist terms within a specific context to do with personal experience or memory. For example, Tar Beach by Faith Ringgold uses the term colored and half-breed Italian. Should we bring attention to these terms or discuss why they're hurtful or inappropriate? Or should we skip over them to avoid alienation or the possibility of having those words repeated? My instinct was to skip over them with my youngest students, but I did miss a teachable moment. So this is a Rosemarieism. It's a personal preference. But from children kindergarten, at least to 3rd grade, I don't introduce racist terms, because I want them to feel very, very comfortable. So Tar Baby, even though I might have it, or I had it last night, is one that we could talk about with older children and then use it as a teachable moment. This was a term that was used then, but I try to refrain from it. You know why? Because there are so many amazing books that don't have them. So I tend to shy away because I don't want to introduce, then say why it's wrong, but we never use it because of this. If the word comes up organically, and I'll tell you, I get this question a lot. How come white people, well, how come only Black people can use the N-word? This is your homework assignment. When we hang up, go to YouTube and put Ta-Nehisi Coates, the N-word, the most amazing video on it ever. But I do believe that as much as we can, we don't want to introduce bias or racism and then have to undo it later, especially before children can really understand it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen.
Okay.
There was also another question that I think really highlights here in Erie. So if you wouldn't mind, it's I'm sorry. I've lost it in the chat. Okay.
It's so much.
Is there an issue? I know the chat box or chat is just going off. Is there an issue in calling racism wrong when some families' political alliances support racism? Are we crossing some kind of line there?
That's an excellent question, because you may have families who support racist beliefs and ideas, but I bet you they don't call themselves racist. So if you were to say racism is wrong, I don't think you'll have a family that says, I'm racist and we're right, because they usually don't believe they are. And so I don't think you're going to cross a line. And if that same family, if you were to say to your children, racism is wrong, and when we treat people differently because of the color of their skin, families who support those racist ideas are usually the first ones to say, I'm the least racist person you know, and we don't treat people differently because of the color of their skin, but because of their behaviors. You see, do you think I'm right with that? To be honest with you, being a Black woman, I don't know anyone who would say to me, I'm racist and I'm proud. But as white people, you may have friends who say, yeah, I'm racist and I'm proud of it, but I've never had that experience. Come on, somebody, give me some feedback in here. Am I? So I'm thinking, yeah, they echo political positions, they echo racist sentiment, but I don't believe they identify as a racist. I think it's coded. Yes, I see that. So I think when you talk about racism being wrong, we can find common ground, because people who support racist beliefs often don't think they're racist. So the common ground is we don't treat people differently because of the way they look. Make sense?
I think what I've seen, like in the comments, and what people will say are things like that they wanted their children to be taught to be colorblind, or that by talking about racism that you're making children racist. So I think those are the kinds of things that people will use to push back on having these conversations.
Mm-hmm. And as educators, we have to say, these are the issues that we're facing, and we have to talk about it. This is what's coming up, and we have to be brave and have these conversations. I don't want you to talk about race. I'm sorry, we have Black children in our classroom. Race is present. We can't, we don't ignore children, we don't ignore families, we don't ignore reality. But I know that you value treating people equitably, that you would not want your child treated differently because of their skin color, and that's what we're teaching. And again, trying to find that common ground is really, really, really important. There's another video by Theo Wilson, a Black activist who went undercover as a white supremacist and found commonality. That's all I'm going to tell you. So Theo Wilson, undercover white supremacist, watch the TED Talk, amazing. And I can't believe, is it okay? I know we're at 8:01. Can I just have 5 more minutes of your time just to get through this?
Yes,
I can't believe.
Thank you, Dr. Allen.
Okay, how fast we're going. So, and you can let the children take the lead. Now, we do recommend that parents and teachers intentionally initiate these conversations, but children will sometimes bring it up too. And when they do, it's important to spend time on what they've noticed. Validate their questions, validate their observations, and then move it to a discussion. Talk about it. Statements and questions such as, I'd love to hear more about that, or that's very interesting. What made you think that? Or how did that make you feel when it happened? Those are some really good ways to deepen the conversation. Involve your children in activities to help them learn about their own culture. I saw somewhere in the chat, and I'll never find it, how you encourage people to talk about culture. And because most of my students are white, and it was very hard for them to see themselves as cultural beings, one of the ways I talked about was I said, do you know that how you celebrate holidays is cultural? Some people, their whole family gets the same pajamas. They open one gift Christmas Eve and the next one. Some people eat tamales. Some people have turkey and dressing. Some people have gumbo. What's your cultural food? What's your cultural practice? I also talk about the differences of culture and religion. I'm a Christian. I was taught to be equally yoked, so I married a Christian. Now I'm a Holy Ghost, Holy Roller, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus, Pentecostal Christian. I married an Episcopalian. talk about different culture. In my church, you can talk back to the preacher. The preacher says, "Do you hear me?" "Yeah, amen, preach, pastor." I went to my husband's church and the pastor said something I agreed with, and I was about to raise my hand and say, "Amen." He put it down. He goes, "Not here, honey." So totally different cultural differences within churches. Even holidays, so you can start there and then talk about beliefs. Do you speak when you enter a room? Are titles very important? The other thing we can't talk about right now, and I do hope to come back one day to talk about culture, is concepts of time, preference for cooperation or competition, how we feel about our elders. All of those things are cultural. I can give more information on that if you like. Let me know. So, you want to make sure that your children see themselves as a cultural being, and also help your children to think critically. So if they say, it's common for children to focus on what they see. "Oh, a new girl came to school today and she's Black and she had braids." You go, "Wow, that's amazing." Then think deeper, ask probing questions that's below what they see. So, how old is she? What things does she like to do? Do you all have anything in common? You say, "Well, she looks like she likes to read because she had a lot of books." What kind of books? Maybe you two like the same books, and help them to dig a little bit deeper so it's not just superficial. And then this is really important. Don't overload your children, because now you're ready to talk about race. And then your child comes in and says something, and then you talk to him about 25 minutes, it's just too much. So the same way with the little guy who almost banged into me at the supermarket. "Hey, you're Black." "Yeah, I am, and you're white. And I have brown eyes and you have blue eyes. Let me see, let's put our skin together and see." So depending on the age and attention span, conversation with children may only last a couple of minutes. But the key is just to have a wonderful casual conversation without shutting them down. So what else can you do? You can initiate a book club with each other, with parents, with teachers, or a conversation with other parents who are interested in talking to their children about race. And how awesome. I know that yesterday, not only was the chat box jumping, but people started having these incredible conversations after the workshop, and even today. Continue the conversation. Look at the book link that you're going to get. Choose a book. I'll tell you, one of the best books, if you really want to understand this whole racial equity journey, is by Debbie Irving, called "Waking Up White." And she talks about her journey of being more and more race conscious and now a social justice warrior. Is a really, really good one. And if you decide to read that book, when she talks about things like the GI Bill and stuff like that, look it up. Don't just read it for entertainment. You can read it in a couple of days, but all of the inequities that's in law and the things that she learned about, just do a little research so that you yourself can dig deeper. So the other thing before I get ready to close, I want you to know that it's okay to make mistakes. You are going to make mistakes. You can expect to make mistakes. One of the ways to help to avoid it is to practice cultural humility. And what this means is that you put yourself in the position as a learner. You don't assume you know anything about anyone, but you position yourself as a learner so that you can learn more about your children, their families, and communities. I call it the practice of not knowing. And then I want you to know that implicit bias can be controlled. You can deprogram yourself. You can retrain your brain. It's not going to be comfortable, but you can do it. And it starts with being intentional about expanding your reality, and then seeking opportunities to positively interact with other racial groups, and getting involved with social groups that are racially and ethnically diverse. Those of you who are on social media, you have a homework assignment. I want you to look at your Facebook friends, and I want you to conduct an audit for those who are a different race, speak a different language, have different political views, who are different religiously and culturally. Then after you do that, I want you to go back to your friend page, especially if it's on Facebook. And do you know the friends you interact the most with are the top of your friend list? Because you might have a very diverse friend list, but you may not be interacting with them as much. So conduct an audit of your social media so that you can get more involved with people who are different from you. And then share your non-biased and anti-racist beliefs with those in your network. And stand up to biased and racist individuals so that we can make the implicit explicit as we continue to have these conversations about race. Whew. Thank you. I know there's a lot in the chat box. I am, if it's okay with Alicia and the mayor, perhaps I can take a look at some of these questions and just answer the questions to post them on YouTube. You know, we can do in the comment area some questions and answers, but I'm willing to look at these and get some of the questions answered. Is there anyone who has a question saying, I'm dying for this to be answered? Is it okay, Mayor, if we take a question or two? I know we're a little over.
Yes, if
I don't feel comfortable asking Deb because it's in the middle of the day, and
if you have a question, feel free to use the feature to raise your hand and we'll see.
Okay.
I don't see any here, or of course the chat.
Can we also just say if anybody wants to ask a question anonymously, they can send it to me, Tangi, or to Amber, or to Alicia?
Certainly, actually, if you would
or
use
even Dr. Allen. I don't know if you want people to directly message you, Dr. Allen, but
yes, that's fine. I do see a hand up. I see
yes, Samantha. Go ahead, Samantha.
Hi, I'm a 5th grade teacher in St. Vrain, and I have tried to have like kind of culture conversations with my kiddos before. I have a pretty, it's almost 50-50 white and Hispanic classroom. And oftentimes my kiddos have no idea what their culture even is. And I've kind of done the like, well, how do you celebrate Christmas? How do you celebrate your winter holidays kind of discussions? But I was wondering if you had any other tips to help kind of bring out, you know, where is your family from? What is your, you know, your history, your cultural background, your ancestral history, kind of that stuff.
Thank you. Such a great question. And I'm glad to hear that you started with the simple in terms of how do you celebrate holidays. But, you know, you can also get families involved. I want to say, Samantha, that you have to be very careful. What you don't want to do are family trees, because some adoptive families are very sensitive to that. And then some people like me who have a very short history line because of my ancestors were enslaved. But you can, with families, you can say, you know, we're talking about culture and different cultural aspects, and then you can write a definition of culture. And what we want to talk about, these are the elements of culture we're talking about today. We're talking about holidays, we're talking about this, we're talking about that. And I've seen this where they have the picture of the child and then some of the cultural things. They put them all around the classroom and then they talk about different cultural things. So if, for instance, you have children who are Hispanic, so they may celebrate, and I am not going to try to say this in Spanish because I'll chop it up, but the Day of the Dead after Halloween. So you may have children so you could bring that up very organically. October 31st is coming up. Some cultures celebrate Halloween. Some cultures celebrate the day after Halloween. Some children don't celebrate at all. Some people have harvest festivals, and you can even do it as a math lesson to take a poll. But what you're going to have to help children see is that those are cultural things. You know, there's so much that we do that's cultural that we don't think about it, you know? So I think just starting very organically with the things you do. Something else that's cultural that's real easy. Do you take a bath at night? Do you take a bath in the morning? You know, that kind of thing. Do you, in my family, because there's 8 children, 2 of us, we took baths by 2s. I guess my mother was thinking, I'm not running bath water for 8 kids. So we took baths by 2s. So even something like that, or a great cultural thing is hair, black hair. How often do you wash your hair? Some of you wash your hair every day. Some of you wash your hair every 3 days. A lot of Black families wash their hair weekly. You know, where do you wash your hair is cultural. So really, really basic things that children do every day, but they don't think about it. Does that help? Okay. I see Christopher.
Hello, I was wondering if you could speak to how to engage a classroom in a conversation about white privilege without assigning blame.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for that. Quite frankly, honestly, this is another Rosemarieism. I don't use the term white privilege because it brings up too much for people. The word privilege denotes that you had an easy life. So one of the things that I talk about is advantage. What advantages do you have just because you're you? But you can use privilege if the children are familiar with that. But the way that I started out is talking about how many children in the classroom are right-handed and how many are left-handed. And then I point out how right-handed children, right-handed people in our world are privileged or advantaged because the world was created for them. Almost everything we do, from the way that our notebooks have spirals on the end, this and that, and blah, blah, blah. Now things have changed a little bit and some accommodations have been made, but those of you who are right-handed never had to think about being right-handed, right? How many of you thought about, oh, I'm privileged because I'm right-handed, but we are. And then you can talk about other ways that we're privileged. How many of you are Christians and get to celebrate holidays? Christmas and Easter, and say that's privilege or that's advantage because our country was developed so that we have Christmas break off and this and that. There are other religions that have Ramadan and Eid and Rosh Hashanah, and they don't get school days off for Rosh Hashanah. You see where I'm going with this? And then as you begin to talk about different categories of privilege, let's talk about our skin. What skin color do you think is privileged in our society? Who do you think gets the best in society? You saw where those children talked about, that girl is white and she's like me. She was about 6 or 7. So 5th graders at 10, about 10, am I right? Been out of it for a while. They can understand that, Christopher. So what skin do you think is the privileged skin in our society, and why is that? And what is that helpful? Just helping them see the other categories and then moving into the skin.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.
Dr. Allen, there's an anonymous question that I don't want you to miss.
Okay.
Do you also talk about social classes in the same way you would talk about race and culture?
Absolutely. Because their class is a privilege. So going back to Christopher's lesson, class is a privilege. So when same way you say, well, okay, we have this Christian privilege, we have this right-handed privilege, people who have money, in what ways are they privileged? You know, that class, I mean, that's a privilege. And then you could even connect that to race. For instance, some people live in neighborhoods and some people don't have cars and they take the bus. But have you ever almost missed your bus and you ran towards it? Do you know in some neighborhoods, Black and brown children can't run for their bus because if the police see them, they might think they did something wrong. So class privilege and racial privilege, you can definitely bring that up, but classism needs to be taught because children, and especially, okay, I'm generalizing and stereotyping. Will you forgive me? But I taught 5th grade for a semester. Ooh, those mean little girls. Oh, the 5th grade girls, they will call you poor and ask you, why are you all seeing that? Poor and designer stuff and you don't belong. And so I think, yes, we have to talk about class, and because it's another way to discriminate and make people feel bad about who they are. And I do see Pip.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask sort of, and I know this is a whole large topic, but how do you address like microaggressions in the classroom, and how do you teach your kids about microaggressions?
It is so important that we do. And I'm going to go through this really fast. But first you have to teach them what microaggressions are and how they're harmful, even when you don't mean it. So Pip, you have curly hair. So if someone came up to you and says, that in a negative way, that looks like an afro, maybe you should straighten it out. That's a microaggression. And they may mean it as a compliment. Oh, actually in the chat box, someone said, do you notice hairstyles? You can say, oh, I like your hair. I see you got it braided. Of course, the way you would anyone else. But you know what I started experiencing as a microaggression? When I wear my hair straight, I get so many compliments, so many. And I'm starting to experience that as a microaggression because I'm starting to feel like, oh, you really like it when it's straight like yours. And I can't explain it, but it just doesn't feel good anymore. It feels like a microaggression. So first letting people know that even when you're paying a person a compliment, it could be a microaggression. But then there are strategies. Remember I talked about those ready responses? As a group, develop ready responses like, I wonder why you said that. I don't find that funny. That offends me. That remark doesn't help people to feel safe in our classrooms. I'm wondering if you can say that differently so that people will be more comfortable with what you said. So if you can develop a treasure chest of ready responses and teach children to use them when they felt microaggressed. And guess what, teachers? You have to do that to each other. How many of you have seen a teacher say something or microaggress against a student? You know? Have those ready responses. I remember interrupting one. I didn't know what to say, and this person was a very loud, kind of boisterous person that you say something to them, they'll just kind of argue with you very loudly, you know, like belligerent. And I'm wondering, how am I going to get her to stop yelling at kids? And finally, after she yelled at this child, and I said, wow, I know they really upset you, but if you could have seen his little face, and how crushed he was. And I don't think you meant to, but I wonder if you broke his spirit. I know it broke my heart, and I know you would never intend that. But I just thought I'd let you know what I saw. She couldn't argue with that. She goes, really? Really? So you have to decide you will be a person to disrupt microaggressions. You will use your ready responses. You will, when you witness it and witness someone else saying, hey, this wasn't right. So if a person saw me say that, then I would count on like Nicole to say, I saw it too. I saw his face. Oh my goodness, it did look like his spirit was broken. That's called echoing. And because sometimes the person who will say it is the person who always says it and no one else will say it. And then they become the problem. So we have to agree to echo each other so that we can dismantle this together. Okay, well, you all have stayed 21 minutes past. I appreciate you so much. Our middle school sessions and high school session is next week.
Yes, I'll take over at this point. Everyone, big round of applause for Dr. Allen. Thank you so incredibly much.
Thank you.
Again, yes, Monday, March 15th is the middle school, and then the 17th is for high school. So very much anticipating that. To keep updated, please visit www.erieco.gov/community conversations. There's a listserv. You can sign up for future events. There's a lot of conversation about a lot of great things coming. So please sign up for that listserv. There's educational resources. And good night, everyone. Thank you so very much.
Good night. Thank you.
Dr. Allen or Alicia, did you want to stay on at all, or are you all good to go?
Alicia, did you need to talk to me? Are we, you know what, we have some time between the next time, whatever you want.
I don't have anything, I'm good.
Okay, so let's just touch base between now and the middle school and high school.
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Great, good to see you all.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Allen.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Harrison. I'm glad to see you here.
I'm glad to be here. It's good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Allen.